This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, it's part 2 of our Salone del Mobile and Milan Design Week specials. This means we've got more creatives in conversation from the Lombardy capital. It includes multidisciplinary artist and designer Omer Arbel, a trip to the cavernous gallery space Nilufar Depot, and a discussion that crosses Singapore and Nigeria. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's show, recorded in London, but recapping the most recent Milan Design Week, which wrapped up on Sunday. I'm joined in the studio by this show's producer, Maylee Evans. Hello, Maylee Evans.
Hello. It's lovely to have you back. I'm just wondering how you're recovering because, as always, the last week, I'm sure, has had you sleep very few hours and running around the city.
Yeah, no, it was pretty non-stop. I don't think I got more than 5 hours sleep. And it sounds weird, but it's like you pack your whole day with meetings, then you manage to scurry around in the afternoon to see a few exhibitions and displays. And then obviously in the evening it is, and I sound like I'm trying to justify drinking, but it is essential that you're kind of out and about and meeting people. And it's crazy the number of stories that you pick up over drinks and aperitivos in the evening. And then it's kind of rinse and repeat for 5 days. But I'm back in London. I'm refreshed.
And you've brought with you a couple of interviews that we're sharing. So we're continuing the celebration of Salone. So who are we going to start with first?
Yeah, we're going to start with Omer Arbel, who was born and raised in Jerusalem. His family relocated to Vancouver in Canada when he was a child, and it's here that he co-founded Bocce in 2005. He serves as creative director, but it's a firm that's maybe best known for making amazing sculptural lights. So when the opportunity came to talk to him in Milan, and this is why we have these 2 weeks of shows, is because there are so many people around that you just want to speak to. We had a little pop-up studio in a church in the middle of the city, which we created in partnership with Design Singapore. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later, because I wanted to talk to him about his practice, which is deeply rooted in research and experimentation, which I think is what makes the Bocce products so unique. And it's this sort of approach that we talked about.
The sort of umbrella over all 3 areas of our work, which are industrial design leading to sort of product design, one, architecture, another, and the third remains sort of at that initial research stage. So the conceptual umbrella over all of it is the idea that form can come from a process rather than from a preconceived imagination of the author. Our job, or my job, me and my colleague, is to invent novel techniques, novel ways of working with materials, starting with their chemical or physical or mechanical properties, developing new tools or just simply new techniques or sequences of techniques. So that's the sort of easy part, is playing around all day long. And then the hard part is accepting whatever happens, because in many cases the results are grotesque or not necessarily fitting into people's conventional perceptions of beauty or marketability or any of these criteria that's usually applied to design. And so we do that all year, and then at the end of the year, my business partner and I sit and decide and surround ourselves with the things we've made, which it's interesting because there's no scale and no budget and no schedule, and we just have whatever we have on the floor, and then we decide, oh, this one might want to be a product, or this one could be part of a building, and whatever is left stays in the archive and remains research. And that's almost the kind of most exciting work. In a way, most of the time it stays in the archive because the production value is so high. It has some sort of fatal flaw. It's like too expensive, or it's very fragile in many cases, or it's just simply impossible to replicate, like we've somehow magically made something and we can't make it again. And that stays in the archive and waits for an opportunity to be exhibited in some context.
That's quite fascinating. So when do you go back to the archive and be like, okay, it's time to revive this?
A few years ago at the Victoria and Albert Museum, we played a lot with the coefficient of expansion of materials. It's the rate at which materials expand and contract. It's affected by temperature. So certain materials expand and contract faster in response to temperatures and others slower. And so for years we had played with matching the coefficient of expansion for glass and copper. And that opened up a whole sort of 5 years of research, because we could finally combine those 2 materials. We could make metals look glassy and glass looks metallic. It was a fascinating thing, and each one responded to the other in all these beautiful ways. But everything suggests it's opposite. And so we also decided to change the recipe of glass. By then we were also well-versed in the chemistry of the material, and so we decided to make a recipe for glass that has exactly the opposite characteristic, which is to say that it diverges very rapidly from the coefficient of expansion of copper. When the glassblowers make vessels of any shape that they like, and we pour liquid copper into the interior of them, while the two are hot, they coexist nicely, but as soon as they start cooling, they do so at different rates. The glass shatters off, leaving a sort of shadow of itself in copper. At the V&A, it was lovely because what I suggested is that they use pieces from the collection, both for the glass and the copper. In other words, the quality of the two materials doesn't matter. So we thought it would be cool if there was like cultural artifacts transformed into new cultural artifacts.
How do you make a business case for this?
Oh, we don't. Those remain collectible.
Okay, but is that the business case itself? Like, there's value in collectible designing and creating one-off pieces?
No. It's the research. The research we do sometimes yields very, very, very marketable pieces too. Like we have an outlet system that's called 22. That's like flush-mounted and very specific, and it's very much a business. And there's a kind of Robin Hood thing of one feeding the other. The material research aspect of our practice often yields discoveries that have application as intellectual property for other industries that are not related to us, like medical devices or whatever. So there's another part of our work which is just licensing ideas to others who are better suited to exploit them.
Where did this initial experimentation or this desire to let the material or the process dictate the form come from?
I mean, a lot of it is just because I'm really good at making stuff, and ever since I was a kid.
But why let yourself be guided by the thing you're working on, not an initial idea?
Because often you're surprised in a positive way. Like you see a lot of complex form generated these days using parametric technology. And with enough resources, you can make any form come to life, and also especially these days with very sophisticated 3D printing or complex construction or fabrication techniques. But I always ask, okay, what's meaningful about that in a way? And if you force glass to bend in particular ways, okay, you may achieve exciting form, but I've always thought that really exciting form surprises you. So it's almost a humility piece. As crazy as I might imagine something, the material will often offer a lot more complexity, a lot more intensity. And it took a long time to accept that. In the beginning, I was trying to force them to be what I thought they should be. It's kind of aggressive, and you don't really find a result that you love. And quite often, the thing you never intended ends up being the best part of the work. Like our original work, 14, was like that. It was like I intended to make a sphere. It didn't really work out because of the way the glass cooled. But the way the glass cooled made the piece what it is, which people responded to, and it was just a huge instant success commercially and critically. That was really a humbling moment because the thing I didn't intend was the best thing about the work. This is 20 years ago.
That's so healthy. That feels so healthy.
I know. I set about revising the entire ethos of the practice to respond to that, to just cultivate that, to look for those moments, to tease them out of a material, those moments of surprise. It requires you not to really intend very much. Like, you have to have intent just a little bit, because otherwise you're frozen. You can't make work. Enough intent to initiate the process of working with people, with materials, with tools. And then you have to be very observant, because the thing you're looking for is very much the opposite usually from what you intended to start making. And then intention becomes a fluid process. You just change your intent. And you repeat that, repeat that, repeat that. So instead of thinking of intention as a kind of end unto itself, it's just a fluid tool.
I guess as a final question, you're celebrating 20 years of practice
Yes.
this year.
Yeah.
Are there any big lessons or big takeaways you can distill for our listeners?
Yeah, just that maybe that's what I just described about materials also applies to everything, to business, to life, to relationships. It's almost silly to try to plan too far ahead. There's so many things that are not in your control. And spending all this energy imagining how things are going to go or planning for a future that may or may not exist is a waste of energy. Much better to just build the maximum amount of flexibility and resilience and accept whatever comes.
Omer Arbel there, Maylee Evans, what are your thoughts on my interview?
With Omer, actually, I remember interviewing him at the V&A for the project he mentioned, 113. So that was glass blowing demonstration, that sort of contraction between glass and copper. But it's always interesting hearing how a maker's developed a practice since you last spoke. And I'm a sucker when it comes to a process-driven approach to design, as opposed to having a very fixed idea of what the outcome should be. It's sort of having an idea of maybe what might happen and then being absolutely flawed when all your preconceptions are proved wrong and you are thrown in a completely different direction. I think that's really exciting.
It's a wonderful message just for life generally. Kind of literally just go with the flow and see where things take you and roll with the punches, and the outcome you might find is absolutely beautiful. On that note, we'll be right back after this. Next on the show, we cross to Nilufar Depot. It's a warehouse-like space on the outskirts of Milan, and it's a design gallery which was established in 2015 by Nina Yasha. She's an Iranian-born curator who opened her first gallery in Milan in 1979. So she is well and truly established on the Milan design scene. To mark the depot's 10th anniversary, a number of installations and projects were on show at the space during Milan Design Week. So we sent our Europe editor, Ed Stocker, to go and speak to some of the designers who featured and collaborated here.
Well, we've come here to the Nilufar Depot in northern Milan to see the Repertorio show. And, well, let's go and meet some of the designers exhibiting here.
My name's Joe Armitage. I'm a designer based in London, focusing mainly on lighting, but also architecture and furniture. So this is a collection called Cycad. Cycad is the name of a Jurassic plant, which is in one of the greenhouses at Kew Gardens in London. And as a kid, I used to spend a lot of time there. And I used to go into these big greenhouses, Victorian greenhouses, at night and photograph the plants. They were really quite magical at night because they were lit up and you get these silhouettes. And what I wanted to create with this collection is that sense of wonder of discovering tropical plants at night. There's a chandelier and then you can see the same form repeated on the floor lamp and the wall lamps.
Tell us a little bit about the materials that you use and where they're made.
The main part of the lamp head, if you like, is a piece of sculpted walnut that's made in Leicester using these amazing Italian 5-axis CNC machines. The shade is made from recycled PET, so that's cut out in Oxford, and it's got this kind of Japanese paper feel to it. It's got a fine felt that gives it like a texture. And then the brass work is done in Blackburn, and it's made with these amazing machines from the 1930s and 40s, all handmade and hand-finished. All of my collectible pieces are UK manufactured, and I feel like I just have a lot more control, and I like the collaborative aspect of it.
And what's it like being here in this incredible space at the depot and working with one of the leading design collectors, you could say, in Milan?
It's a big honour. Nina Yasha is the sort of doyenne of design in Milan, and the space here at the depot is so impressive. It's kind of the spot. I always wanted to exhibit here.
My name is Roberto Cironi. I am a designer based in Milano. I developed this collection named Afanes. It's a marble collection developed in collaboration with Palmalisa Zantedeschi, who is an extraordinary marble editor and also marble collector. And she gave me the opportunity to work with different blocks of rare marble. And it was an amazing journey through this material. And through this collection, I tried to express all of my feelings and my perspective and vision and use of this material, which is very, very strong with a beautiful pattern and texture. And from the design point of view, we have worked with primary shapes, remembering the Neolithic architecture in contrast with this rich pattern. It's interesting because it's absolutely not commercial material. It's not commercial marble, so there's no name behind this marble. And for me, it's super interesting because I can play with this fantastic pattern and colors, try to understand the real nature of the material and the marble itself, playing with colors and texture and finishing to create a sort of dialogue and relationship between me and the material.
And there's greens, the sort of almost yellowy colour, darker. There's a hint of almost pink. It's amazing. And we were talking before we started recording about marble, how you cut it shows a different time. How much do you like that? That seems to be something that runs through your work a bit, this research, history, time, looking back.
I try to design the pieces respecting the temporal dimension of the material, of the matter. So my approach is to divide the material in different levels and try to understand the nature of the material from the historical point of view, geographical point of view, anthropological point of view, because, there is always a relationship between materials and humans. I have the urgency to explore all of the dimension, and so it's not just the aesthetic point of view, but there is more and more.
My name is Stefania Di Gregorio, and I'm the co-founder of Ethereal Design, a boutique firm based in Dubai and Milano. The studio born thanks to me and Mirko, the other co-founder of the company. We actually opened first in Dubai and then in Milano, so we did actually the opposite way around because we are Italian, so usually we start from Italy and then we move abroad. We start from there because we had the opportunity to start from there. There are actually in Dubai, in UAE, a lot of opportunities for business. We are specialized in residential project. We also do some boutique hotel, some hospitality, but always in the sector of luxury and super luxury.
And how long have you had a collection? When did you start doing pieces? Did that just come about after doing residences because you were actually doing everything? You were designing the interiors as well?
Yeah, because our design is very much bespoke. So we used to customize every single piece. So from there, it came naturally, the idea to create collection out of the pieces we were designing for our project. And this is how also Faraglioni collection burned. It was designed for a property, so then we decided to create a collection out of that.
Just tell me about this incredible table that's got two different types of glass and these bronze legs. Maybe just explain it a bit more.
The vision behind this piece, it was to bring inside of the house the sea, because the view of that apartment was right on the sea. So we wanted to create a very strong connection between the indoor and the outdoor. So that's why we have created this piece, which is made of casted bronze, which is the leg, which represents the rock of Faraglioni, the very famous Faraglioni from Capri, and the glass that it's representing the sea. That's why 2 layers of glass, which is representing exactly the color and the shade of the sea that it's going against the rock. Every piece of glass is made out 2 layers of glasses melded together. All the pieces that you saw here today are produced totally in Italy. And this is something very important, to export the Italian heritage and the Italian knowledge.
That was Stefania Gregorio, and before that, Roberto Cerrone and Joe Armitage. They were in conversation with Monocle's Europe editor, Ed Stocker.
Welcome back to Monocle on Design. This is a second of our special episodes focusing on Salone del Mobile and Milan Design Week. Nick, we're on to our final conversation from this year's edition. We're hearing from 2 different continents. Where are we going today?
We're going to Singapore and Nigeria. Now, as I kind of alluded to at the top, we had a pop-up studio in Milan in partnership with Design Singapore Council, and there'll be a special episode. This is a little teaser. There's a special episode dropping next week featuring a host of conversations from that showcase. But it was essentially a chance to kind of get people in, talk about the future of design, which was the theme of this exhibition, Future Impact 3 Design Nation. And it was a showcase dedicated to exploring the future of design. It was a really beautiful jumping off point for a host of different discussions. This conversation we're going to hear is between myself, Wong and Geng, and Nifemi Marcus-Bello. Now, Geng is a Singapore-based design researcher and industrial designer, whilst Nifemi runs a studio out of Lagos that splits its output into commercial work and artistic artistic practice. Both of them are kind of in this world of, similar to Omer earlier in the show, but they're all about experimentation and kind of unpacking and exploring different ways of working outside of the conventional molds. And I think that's what made me want to bring the two together. So that's the conversation we're going to hear from now. And Nifemi kicked it all off by discussing his research into anonymously designed objects.
There's design in every single nation, and they're everyday objects that we take for granted. I started investigating these anonymously designed objects to educate myself on what was readily available, and also trying to poke, or I'd say make sure that there was a lot more engagement to everyday objects within Nigeria. So I started choosing anonymously designed objects, so I'd say unauthored. For example, the one that I always reference is the Kwali, which is like a handheld kiosk that's made out of cardboard, used to sell confectionaries across heavy Lagos traffic. And the idea is that as you're driving home and you're stuck in traffic, you can actually just wind down and then pick up a few things.
Is formalising the right word, or you're using this and maybe building a structure around it through your studio?
I'm definitely not formalising. What I'm trying to do is understand and also investigate what design is in Nigeria. So creating case studies around these objects and breaking them down to their bill of materials, and then understanding how it's building an ecosystem around either recycled materials or, again, readily available materials.
And this is maybe a perfect place to bring Geng in. I mean, tell us a little bit. Nifemi's talking about breaking down materials and their potentials. How does this feed into your work?
Yeah, when you mention ready-made material or like readily available material, that's exactly what I was trying to explore in the Singapore community. So the kind of material that I was looking into is actually bulky refuge. So disposed furniture, specifically furniture, because through my investigation, through the exploration, you realize that for furniture, it is the only thing that dumpster divers don't really pick up because there's not a lot of like monetary value. Right? You know, when you think of metal, people get it, they sell it away. But for fabric, for woods that comes from maybe sofas or dining chair, nobody really picks that out. So that's what my project is trying to explore, how those materials can be used as so-called raw ingredients for crafters to then use to make maybe tote bags, or for example, I made a little nice chair there. Right? So just trying to see how everyday people can just go downstairs and see what the dumpster presents, right, and then use those as materials instead.
So it's a different way of looking at how we source what we build our world with. You mentioned craft there, which is quite fascinating to me. We're taking this kind of research that you've done, this discovery of the potential materials there. How important is bringing a craft lens or a craft approach to that versus an industrial process to that?
Yeah. In my opinion, I think for Singapore, the crafting aspects of it is something that we should put a bit more emphasis on, because we are such a young nation, right? And when the nation started around 60 years ago, there were a lot of different races and a lot of different kind of like culture that came together. So some might argue that Singapore is so young that there isn't a culture. Like when you think of Singaporean design, there's nothing distinctive or like a design style that comes to mind. So I would argue that 60 years, the pioneers have laid down a foundation, right? I feel like crafters and designers should start to look inwards towards Singapore and then see what are the materials, in a sense, like that comes from Singapore, and how do you then build a design language or distinctive style from Singapore. So that's why I feel like the local crafter, the local artists, they are very important in this process.
I feel like Lagos is quite the same. There's this huge multicultural community. We've got people coming from different parts of the country. It's the sort of, I don't know, catch-all for Nigeria and that part of Africa. I mean, is there potential for building a better world from moments like this where, I don't want to call it chaos, but Singapore's chaotic in its own way. Lagos is chaotic in its own way because you've got so many different cultures coming together. Is that where there's
organized chaos?
Organised chaos. Is that where the potential is as a designer?
I think so. I mean, that's why I named my research project an Africa Designers Utopia, because I actually see it as a utopia. And I think that with the chaos, I think leaning into it and understanding and observing and making sure that your ego doesn't play a role into what the output is extremely crucial. So I lean into it as much as possible. And I love it. I always tell people that I can see myself practicing in another city, but for now, Lagos is where it's at.
Talk to me a little bit about the craft in your work. I mean, we were talking about it in Singapore and the potential to actually tap into the craftspeople there. I mean, what's the craft scene like in Lagos?
It's always been. That's the thing. There's extremely talented people that work with all sorts of materials. If I started naming them, it would be never ending. From a personal standpoint, I started using my hands again, I think, about 4 years ago, just because I thought to myself that I started feeling like the industrial design side of me was not as human as I wanted it to be. And I think especially with how technology is playing such a huge role in our daily lives, I think people want to have feelings that are a lot more authentic and a lot more raw. And I think you can get that with craft. So when I started using my hands, I felt a lot more closer to the materials. And I also felt like it allowed me to pause and also think and consider the human aspect of design and the emotional side of design. Craft is something that I'm really intrigued with, and you'll see a lot more in my work.
I mean, the human aspect, the emotional aspect, and Geng, is that part of also the Singaporean piece? Yes, you've got the materials, but there's also potential to bring people into this?
I completely agree with what you're saying. I feel like in Singapore, people think too big, and like any problems that requires a solution, they always have these big ideas. Maybe you need a big industrial plant to do recycling, you need to have a big movement. But in my opinion, what I'm trying to argue is that it can be very actionable. You could just go downstairs, step out of your door, see what's presented in the rubbish, and then using your hands, getting very close to the material, trying to feel it, see how does the material inspire you, what kind of needs do you have at that moment, and what can you make to solve that problem. And I think that is something that is a bit different from industrial design. Industrial design is still very important, but I feel like we can tap into the other side of it and try to get closer with the materials.
I walked through the exhibition quite quickly, but there's something that designers take for granted, which is a systematic approach to design. I mean, just outside we were talking about design integration and policies and the role that government has to play, and how designers, we don't need to keep designing the same objects over and over again. What are the main issues that we're having in our daily lives? How can life be better in Singapore through design? You understand? Is it recycling? Is it reducing the traffic, if there is any traffic, as much as So I think it's really thinking about it from a systematic standpoint.
So design doesn't necessarily have to be about the object that you're producing?
No, I don't think so. I think now more than ever, we need people who think with systems in mind.
I'm going to put air quotes here. Is that the future of design? It's more about you mentioned design research, and Geng, Nifemi, you're talking about thinking about systems. Is that where design's heading?
In my opinion, yes.
So then how does that translate into, for both of you, how does that translate into your day-to-day practice?
For me, what I work on full-time is actually design research. So sometimes people ask, how does design play a part? The design part, so there's the part about the outcome where designers can take and move on with it. But there's also the way that you do your interviews, the way that you do your research. So a lot of times we use our design skills to actually design tools that we then implement in our interviews. What we are trying to get to is sometimes you get them to do a certain exercise. I think my favorite example was when we were doing our research for the Dormitory Association. It's the dormitory for migrant workers. What we did was we gave them disposable cameras, and then we told them just take photos of your daily interaction with each other, and then we will print it out to you so they can send it back home. But in that process, when we took the photos, we were able to see how they live their life in the dormitory, and then picked out insights from there of our prototypes, whether it was working, whether people were using it, were they not. I think the design aspect, if you are good with design thinking and you have it in your workflow, you can apply it to a lot of different areas in life in general, right?
I mean, and Nifemi, systems, how does that come into your everyday? You've got your artistic practice, you've got your more commercial practice. Where does systems come into that?
I think in both practices it comes in. I'll jump into the artistic side. I think I started this design series called the Oriki Design Series, and that was actually looking into material affirmation, material evolution, and also understanding why certain materials are prominent within my city. So it wasn't just the output that was important, but actually the idea behind the object, the context behind the object. So for me, it's something that I make sure that it's in the core of my practice.
I think that makes perfect sense. Let's zoom into design's impact on our everyday. How can design elevate our everyday lives? So is there anything you can point to that's every time I use this or I engage with this, my life's improved?
I would say for me is consideration and cultural context. The way everyone lives, we live in a global world, but at the same time, life in Lagos is different from life in Singapore. Mm-hmm. The temperature in Lagos is different and the temperament is also different. So for me, I would say just cultural consideration. At the core of design thinking is ethnographic research and understanding. Some people take that for granted. Because we live in a world where everyone's on Instagram, they still think that, okay, if a kid likes this in America, he's going to like it in Lagos as well. He might do, but there's a cultural angle to it as well.
That needs to be engaged with.
Yeah.
And Geng, design elevating our everyday?
I think design is just that saying that goes good designs are invisible. Right? So actually every decision that is made, there is some form of design behind it. Everything that you use, even things that you see daily, like for example, in like Singapore context, your chopsticks or your cutleries that you use, there was someone that went through the design process to make it. So that's why I feel like design is something that important that everybody should still focus on, because it then makes important decisions for how we live our life. That's how I see design playing a role in like daily lives.
That was Wong and Geng, and before that, Nifemi Marcus-Bello in conversation with Monocle's design editor, Nick Muniz.
And that's me, and that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra. That airs every Thursday. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Muniz. Thanks for listening.